Hi, I'm Greg Brahe, and I'm an atheist. Intellectual honesty can be a scary thing. It means setting aside your pride, putting your most cherished beliefs on the line, and examining them with honest and open inquiry, looking at them from dissenting viewpoints and considering all of the evidence and all the options and admitting a possibility that you might be wrong. That's so scary, in fact, that people have cloistered themselves away. They've locked out dissenting opinions, shunned them, or worse, through almost all of human history. But the New Covenant Group is different. Join us Sundays at 6 o'clock for Inspiring Honesty, authentic inquiry between a believer and a non-believer on the questions that really matter.
I like the way that Greg is engaged. He's enthusiastic about this in a very real way, which is excellent. I think he's ready to deal with the issues, bring out what he perceives, and to be honest with you, I'm more than excited and ready to respond.
When I was first asked to be on the show, I have to be honest, it was a little daunting. I've never seen, and as far as I'm aware, there's never been an atheist in a hosting position on a regular show through a Christian broadcast. That's a lot of pressure. I need to really represent my side well, but I'm excited. I think that this is going to be a fantastic opportunity for some important conversations that never would have happened if the Christians stayed with the Christians and the atheists stayed with the atheists and the theists stayed with the theists and the Muslims stayed with the Muslims. The conversations need to be addressed from multiple angles.
Whatever there is to risk through genuine dialogue, it probably isn't worth having.
In polite society, there have always been things that are considered taboo. A person's faith is beyond question. It's beyond challenge. It's sacred. Well, I disagree. And the New Covenant Group has invited me to be part of their show where, for the first time ever, an atheist, myself, can sit down with a believer and have real conversations about the subjects that matter, subjects that have always been off limits before. Hi, I'm Greg Brahe, and welcome to Inspiring Honesty. I'm your host, and as I've mentioned in every show, and I will always open with, I'm an atheist. I'll be joined again today by Bob Greaves as our guest host, and we're going to continue some of the conversations that we had last week. Before we get to that, I wanted to open up with a little bit of my story, a little bit of where I'm coming from as the atheist and the host of this show. And if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, I'm going to wax a little narcissistic and go back with some reminiscing. But to start off, I was raised in a rather non-religious home. It was not a strongly Christian home. I was baptized as an infant, and I was brought to church on a somewhat regular basis by my father. Brought there mainly, I think, because it was an expected thing to do by society around. We didn't talk much about Jesus, God, religion, the Bible, anything like that outside of the church setting. He did teach us a few prayers, but for the most part, my upbringing was a secular upbringing. And that bothered me. By the time I made it to about 13 years old, I was going through the religious education classes for confirmation, and all that I could come up with were questions. There was this need in me to be filled by something. I needed to know more about what these people were talking about. And I mentioned in last week's show that I think that the questions of religion and faith are some of the most important questions that we can possibly have, because they really do speak to some of the more important aspects of our life. And there must be an answer, whether we can know it or not. So it was at about 13 that I began my search for something. And that began with asking questions in my religious education classes, which got me kicked out of religious education. From there, it moved on to asking questions to my friends and to family members, having some more conversations, and actually meeting my wife. Starting to date her in high school was a fantastic step along the way to where I am today. My wife is Catholic, and she had never really spoken to anybody who did not have an active belief in any gods before that. At that point, I would describe myself as agnostic. I understand the terminology better a bit now and wouldn't do that, but as true as it still is. I enjoyed conversations with her about her faith and learning about what benefits it had for her and the ways that it confused her how I couldn't believe things. And that it just got me to digging more and more and searching. I have a fantastic, one of my best friends is a Jehovah's Witness, and I study with him still on a regular basis for his understanding of and his faith and the Bible. And it's been an amazing asset to me and an incredible part of our friendship. But it was not enough still. So when I was in college, I believe it was my sophomore year, the day that I proposed to my wife was the same day that I started what's called RCIA classes. That is the Rite of Christian Initiation for adults, or becoming Catholic. And as I mentioned before, I spent hours after every class having conversations with a fantastic Norbertine priest and digging into some of the deeper questions that got me to think and to compartmentalize some of the doubts that I'd had before, and to realize that there are ways to reconcile faith with a rational viewpoint of the world. And I still don't disagree with that today. I have seen, it depends on the faith, I want to qualify, but I still don't believe that it's impossible to have faith and to still have a rational viewpoint of the world today. I do not have faith, and that came later. When I was confirmed Catholic, which yes, I did go through the confirmation process, I recited the Apostles' Creed as part of the confirmation ceremony, even though I knew as I was saying it that most of what was in it was not something that I believed. But as I examined my own faith and looked back, I realized that the 2 points in my life that, or I'm sorry, not in my life, but the 2 points in history that I could really find faith were the creation of the universe. I had no idea what caused the Big Bang, and the creation of life. As a biologist, I understand how from the first moment of life, at the moment it became self-replicating, there is a perfectly understood way of how it became as diverse and incredible as it is today. But we still are a little bit at a loss to explain how that life started. And that's where I looked at those 2 moments, and I called those moments God. It was about 2, maybe 3 years later that I, after much, much, much more studying and reading, realized that what I had been doing is adhering to the God of the gaps. I was taking the phrase, I don't know, and replacing that with God. And that was a startling realization for me. At that moment, and that was a moment that I won't ever forget, is when I realized that I was an atheist. And I know that sounds odd. I didn't decide to be an atheist. I never made a choice. I simply always had been one and hadn't really understood that before. I didn't believe that there was a God. What I believed was that there were things we didn't know, and I was labeling those things as God. As I've developed from there, I've obviously, getting active enough to have a show like this, had to come out, as it were, about my faith. And that's caused problems. I've lost friends. I've alienated some family members. Not really. We've repaired gaps, but there's still concerns even now that are brought up to me. I was asked as recently as a religious holiday this year to not talk about religion in any way while I was there by the family. And I think that as I came out to the family and as I grew into these things, I became more aware of the effects that faith has on people, even people of nominal faith, people that are not fundamentalist, people even very universal faith or universalist faith that still can have some serious side effects. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. I'm going to start off by making the statement that sorry, I wrote it down ahead of time, so I had this a little bit better planned out. But statement that's the basis of why I chose to do this show in the first place. And it's because I hope to convert you. As the viewers, I hope that I can convince you that atheism is the most intellectually honest position to have. And I know that that's why I was invited to be on this show. I also know that the goal of most theists, and I think anybody who believes, would be to convince me otherwise. I think that when you hold a belief, you hold that as the truth. And when we have discussions about this, it's our way of trying to get closer to the truth. Whether that means shifting our positions closer together or having one person move entirely to the other side, that's the goal in conversations like that. So, I want to state that I believe that atheism is the most intellectually honest position. And I believe that faith of any kind in the supernatural is harmful for all of us. And with that statement, I wanted to bring in Bob Greaves and see what he has to say about that. Bob, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Good to talk to you again.
Good to talk to you too. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Bob, welcome, and I sorry to lead in with such a I guess adversarial approach there, but last week we talked about faith and the nature of faith, where it does come down to going beyond evidence in some ways and having belief in the unprovable. But do you agree that, well, before we even get into the faith, do you agree that the reason that you do your show and the reason that you're on this one is because you think that you're right? Or at least that your position is the best one to have? Or am I starting off on the wrong foot right away?
Well, I think that is a very common purpose that is had. I believe I'm right, but that at the same time, I don't. I had to go through a process to get where I'm at, and I don't expect anyone else to get to where I'm at without going through a process that gets them there. So I have no desire to be to somehow control, manipulate, or cause that process. I would rather a person who becomes a believer because whatever process they go through that is authentic for them, that leads them there, that's the process I want them to have. And I don't really know if I can play any role in that other than to just, share where I come from. So my goal is merely to be available as a resource for people who might find the way I have considered things useful. But I would agree that I think that, and I think it's a weakness, that most ministers seem to be out to really want to convert the world, to belief and loyalty to their particular doctrine, tradition, or whatever. But I'm not there personally.
Then why do you have a ministry? What is your goal in being the unconventional pastor?
People who are asking questions are looking for various different points of view. And each of us possess a unique experience and can therefore contribute in dialogue to things to consider. The universe, the questions are always so much bigger than I am, that I can do far better with these questions if I'm talking to other people who have also struggled with them. And sometimes they will say things that when I hear them, I go, oh, well, yeah, okay, I see that. Or sometimes they'll say things where I realize, It's just not cutting it, and it even forces me to abandon some of my own ideas. So, in the process of dialogue, I'm looking for authenticity to emerge.
That's an interesting way to state that. And I have to admit that you, of all people I've talked to about issues similar to this, are probably the most even-handed and the most neutral in your responses to things,
Yeah,
which
that's why they call me the unconventional pastor. I
yeah,
guess.
it's frustrating. I want you to take a stand and tell me I'm wrong. It's easier that way, but that's
Well,
that's
if you want me
yeah.
to take a stand like that, as an atheist, I would say that I think you're wrong in saying that it's the most intellectually honest position. Personally, I would believe that agnosticism is the intellectually most honest position.
Well,
Uh,
it's true, but atheism versus theism and Gnosticism versus agnosticism are two separate realms of.
Yeah, depending on how you want to define them, yes. I guess what I'm saying is that from an intellect, I consider the intellect the attempt to deal with logic, ideas, verification, proof, and I consider that merely a sliver of life that we have through our sensory perception, some control over, and that some of the things that we as human beings have to deal with possess this luxurious ability to be available to such considerations as measuring, understanding, but a great deal of life doesn't. And so I have no problem with things that can be true and unverified. I just don't think it's. I would have to agree with you that I think that that many times people of faith, they're looking for a way of turning the spin about their faith into something that, aha, when you hear this, when you understand this, you're just going to have to bow your knee and pray to God and confess and admit everything. And that's an illusion as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I got to this a little bit in our first show when we discussed what do you think I'm missing out on by
Right.
not having faith, and you really um, you made a very I don't even know what the best word
But
is here, but
my response was
very
basically, I don't have a
diplomatic
clue because I don't
answer.
know you well enough. And many times, many people can be without things they don't realize they're without until they get them. So who knows?
That's a fair point. That having been somebody who's never had faith, I really can't say what the benefits are of it. I know that there's plenty of authors and speakers out there that have come from positions of faith and become atheists, and of course their stories are sometimes more interesting than mine. But it's I think it's best to let people know sort of where your background comes from, which is why I opened the way I did
Sure.
today.
And in your defense, I would have to say that theism comes from a long line of manipulative spin that I think when a person comes to the spin, they either latch onto it for reasons that I don't understand, or they become deliberately manipulative, knowing full well that there's no veracity in the spin, or they go crash, and their honesty begs them to even react. And I think that's part of what makes a number of atheists.
I can't disagree with that. There's a good number of very reactionary atheists as well, and I think that there's some fantastic examples of those in some of the more prominent ones even today.
Mhm.
Ion Hersey Ali and Dan Barker come to mind. But even so, the ideas that you're bringing up about faith and that people who have faith are um, they feel a need to defend it. I mean, I can't criticize that. I feel the same way, and
Yeah.
I know it's difficult to have the conversation with somebody who says basically live and let live, and it's a fantastic, very Zen concept that you have. But it's
And so I share. I mean, if they find it useful, they do, and if they don't, they don't. And yeah. So what can I do about that? And why do I need to do anything about it? And is it even my problem? I just I can't put myself into that shoehorned position, I guess.
Let me tell you why I make the statement that I think faith is a harmful thing for the world, and regardless of that, a, where that faith comes from or who has that faith, and I will even apply that to the very very open-minded faith that you have. Now, I don't believe that your faith, as you hold it, is doing any harm to anybody. I think that it's a fantastic asset to you, the people that you know, and it's good for your life and for the things you do. I'm sure it's a great inspiration for you. However, as we discussed in the past, faith is by definition something that has to be taken without evidence. And without verifiable evidence. We've discussed the arguments for the existence of gods, and the arguments from personal experience. And as I'm hoping I'm not putting words into your mouth here, but as you even mentioned, there isn't a absolute reason to believe that there is a God.
Not absolutely. And I would say, when you go into a court of law and the prosecution is trying to prove that a crime occurred, they bring evidence. And as it turns out, it's often a preponderance of the evidence. They're looking for something beyond a reasonable doubt. They're looking for things that cause a belief in guilt to be reasonably coherent. It's a rare trial that involves such proof of the crime that it's just a slam dunk.
Well, that's true, but the reasonable doubts approach that's the scientific method, that you assume that it's false until you really can no longer reasonably do so.
I think that it is an excellent way to pursue science. I think it is a horrible way to pursue life.
Well, I would disagree on that note, and part of the reason that, I guess the reason that I believe faith to be harmful, in general, is actually there's a fantastic example of it right on our Ustream feed right now. Your faith, being as open and as accepting as it is, it still legitimizes other people's faith. And it was a comment just like this that initially got me in touch with Dr. Jones and the New Covenant group, and got me kicked out of the Universalist group that I was part of on Facebook. There was somebody who had mentioned that their faith was, or their church, people within it and people on their Facebook newsfeed may react negatively to some of the things that they have to say. And these are very open-minded people that were still even considering themselves Christians. And my argument in the long run came from, since there is no way to measure which faith is more correct than other faiths, it's based on conjecture and on personal belief, the arguments for personal experience, anything like that, that all things not rooted in evidence lend legitimacy to the idea that it's okay to have beliefs not rooted in evidence.
Well, I don't think my faith is rooted in beliefs. For example, do you drink water?
I do.
Now, imagine as a biologist, you know an awful lot of interesting things about water. But the benefits of water to your body and drinking it in a balanced way are the benefits that they are without your ever really knowing for sure if your understanding or beliefs about water and what it does and how it operates in the body. There's a sense in which I don't think you drink water because, as a biologist, you've studied this and you understand it. You drink it because you're thirsty and it quenches that thirst, and it is a very beneficial thing. My faith is, for example, when I say I don't believe in the doctrine of atonement, I believe in the event of the cross. I'm trying to state my faith in things that are inarticulate. I believe in you. I know you exist. I know you're a person. As we've gotten to have had many discussions, I think I like you, but I really don't know you so well that that anything that I believe about you is just arguably so. But my relationship with you isn't even based on the fact that I think I've got your number. I don't, and I don't need your number, and I don't need God's number. I don't need beliefs about him that are verifiably absolutely true and my need to champion them. He
But
is who
shouldn't
he
they be
is and can be
reasonably
who he
true?
can be, and he can surprise me, and so to me, my faith doesn't even require that I've got those things nailed down.
But you have faith in specifics. It's not just
I
that you have
Well,
faith generally
and
that
they're for
there's
me
good stuff
conjectures,
out there.
and if those specifics make sense to somebody else, great. And if they don't, I could be full of crap. I have nothing
Well,
invested in it.
that's a very honest position, but at the same, I mean, you said that you do believe that Christ was a historical figure, that he died and was resurrected,
Mhm.
and in a, I mean, discussed a touch whether that was miraculous or something that we
Mhm.
simply don't understand about biology. I think that I failed as a biologist to address that quite properly last week, but um, that's okay. We don't need to go back to that one, but I mean, that's a specific event, and it's a
It
specific
is. It is
reality
a
that.
specific event that I believe took place. That doesn't mean that I claim to understand the event. Now, I believe that Jesus was an historical person, based upon standard historical research that tries to determine how a name actually even gets out there. How is it that
Sure.
certain traditions, myths, and legends develop? And so, from that standpoint, although there are certainly a lot of people who would like to believe and show that Jesus wasn't even an historical person, I really think that their historical methods are far from accepted by the historical community, even the historical community that does not believe that Jesus is the Son of God. They still
Sure.
recognize historically that
Well, I'm
there
not
was this
arguing that
guy.
he's not a historical figure. But
Pardon me again?
I will certainly say that I honestly don't believe it matters whether Jesus was a historical figure or a purely mythological figure. I think that the truth that can be found within the pages of the Bible is something that is unrelated to the historical facts of the Bible. Things like when Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, right? I think that's a truism. I think that is a
Mhm.
good goal, is a moral statement that people should follow
Right.
or strive for,
You,
regardless of whether Jesus actually existed or actually said that. That doesn't matter.
Yeah, well,
But
you want to be careful
belief,
because you might start arguing and making an argument that I think you reject and that I do too. That one of the proofs of God is the fact that the aspects of His love seem so innate.
that I certainly have heard that argument. And you're right. I do
Yeah,
reject that. But that doesn't mean that there's not good things still within the Bible. There's not statements that anybody could live by and that are not harmful. There's statements like that in all
right.
kinds of things. I mean, Harry Potter.
Now,
I have learned more about being a good person from that than I did from
yeah,
the pages of the Bible. But
could it be any other way without regard to the veracity of who Jesus is? I mean, if Jesus really is who he is, obviously he would have to be someone consistent with his creation. And if Jesus isn't the Son of God, then he's just a human being and invented by human beings. And all the stuff that comes out of this would also, in some way, have to be consistent with who and what we are as human beings. So I don't see how it
well,
could
that's
actually
exactly why
be
I
any
say it
other
doesn't
way
really matter.
without regard to the question.
But the question is not so much on Jesus and what he said, but more the belief in what he did and the magical things that happen in the Bible. And I apologize for using the term magical. I know we discussed it a bit, but
That's fine.
it's I think the best term to discuss sort of the difference between things that we know can and do normally and historically happen to things that are miraculous or supernatural in some way, such as the resurrection or the multiplication of fishes and loaves or the walking on water, the raising of the dead, the healing of the sick. These are all things that, as far as we are aware, don't happen in the real world. There are things that can happen in stories very easily and that have happened in stories forever, before the time of Christ and still forever after. But the belief that those things actually happened as historical events lends credence to the belief in anything that we don't have a historical or that can't be accepted beyond a reasonable doubt. That there's not enough evidence to accept.
religion can be a slippery slope for those who feel a need to be overly rambunctious in their justification of their claim that it's totally and completely not only reasonable but compelling.
But don't you think that just having belief that there was a Jesus Christ, and this Jesus Christ was in some way related to God and did supernatural things, you're already overlapping with some of the most core tenets of some of the most fundamentalist Christians. At that point, it just comes down to nitpicking as to how much detail you're going to accept as true. And it's a difficult, and you're right, slippery slope is the best way to put it. I don't think that it depends on any individual as far as the slippery slope, but that somebody within it. And I mentioned there's something going on in the Ustream feed here that brings it up perfectly. We have a user, it's TALI346. When I mentioned converting Christians to atheism, I'm just going to read off the last couple comments here. It says, convert Christians to atheism? What a joke. They'll never give up their faith in God. They'll die a martyr's death instead. I would. I think he's a deluded person. Atheism is a worse sickness than AIDS or cancer. Faith is not harmful to the world. Atheism is. And this is somebody watching this show who's I'm hoping going to benefit a bit from it.
I think most atheists were at one time theists.
Well, that's probably more of a demographic statement than anything else, though.
Right.
Most people on the planet are raised in theistic homes. So.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No. I don't know who the person who posted that comment is. It sounds to me like they're being defensive of something they feel is being attacked, which probably means you're doing a pretty good job.
That was my stated goal, I guess, so that can't be.
Yeah, but I certainly don't feel the same way they do.
And I completely understand that. And again, I'm not attacking your faith directly and saying that your faith is harmful. What I'm saying is the fact that this person, and even say Fred Phelps of the Westboro Baptist Church, believes in some of the same things that you do. He believes that there was a historical person named Jesus Christ, and that person died and was resurrected through some magical way, and that was a redemptive factor. Now, he has all kinds of other things that he believes that I think don't represent at least 99% of other Christians out there. But now, the fact that there's... Oh, go ahead.
I could make a case that he probably doesn't believe any of that stuff. The fact that most of the people in his church are actually attorneys. The fact that a lot of them end up going to places trying to be outrageous, waiting to be attacked, and then end up suing for their civil rights being violated. I think they got a scam going, and they're being as outrageous as they can be because it's a great scam. Do they really believe this stuff? I don't know. But I mean, I think that every religion, and in fact every irreligion, has its fundamentalists. Fundamentalism is a narcissistic, control freak, borderline personality kind of thing, where people feel this need to just demand of others total compliance with some sort of paradigm. No matter what it is, so that, I mean, even when it comes to leadership, in anything, there are certain personality types that rely on this kind of method for coping and dealing. And when they get involved in religion, or if they, I mean, I'll tell you, if there were a few atheists out there who were starting to get so fundamentalist that they were just, I mean, most atheists would say, cool it, Jack. This ain't helping. So I don't personally know how to categorize the faith.
Well, I would actually disagree. I just said that's true, but coming to look at what it means to be a fundamentalist atheist is a very different thing than what it means to be a fundamentalist Christian, Muslim. It's, I mean, any religion out there has its core tenets and its dogma and the things that are associated with the scriptures. And I mean, we could talk all day. We could get Dr. Jones on here to talk about translations and accuracies and inaccuracies within the Abjad and all the other fun things that come with transliteration as well. But the reality is that there's still, regardless of what the authors of the Bible actually meant when they wrote it, there's still an accepted translation or understanding of what it says to a large extent within groups of people. And that means that we can discuss the realities of what people do believe in it. And when you talk about fundamentalist atheism, that is radical reality. That is a radical adherence to the scientific method and to scientific naturalism and accepting the world as is verifiably true.
Which works for science but not for life, in my opinion.
Well, what harm is in that for us to point?
I think that the harm that is in that is it relationally. Human beings need to realize that we are in relationship with each other with a great deal of vulnerabilities and a great deal of genuine social, personal, developmental needs. And this is all in a context of vulnerability that is unverifiable, that requires caution and care as we look for love and connection and relation. And this all happens in a context where the most meaningful things in life are the relationships that you have. And none of these are the sorts of things that can be based on things we can nail to the floor. They involve trust. They involve forgiveness. They involve actually sometimes developing a relationship even with people you know full well are not going to have your best interests in mind. And although I would certainly, for example, if I'm dealing with a person I know to be manipulative, I'm not going to pretend, they'll never be manipulative again with me. But
how do you know this person to be manipulative? When you know somebody, when you talk about people who are going to use the relationships or people who are going to be fantastic for one another, these are all things that even if your personal opinions, your emotional sides of things, your trust, your faith in that relationship are independent of the scientific method at their core. In their details, they're completely dependent upon your trust of your observation and your ability to interpret the world around you.
No, not for me.
So, well, I guess I don't know what to say with that. It's
I think that even my belief that most human beings will thrive when loved and when respected. I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest I could be crazy in thinking that. And yet I find that even if I'm dealing with people who have betrayed me or people who don't understand me or don't trust me, that as I seek to truly champion that kind of value in a human being, that that I find a far more meaningful way of approaching my relationships. And not that I want to ignore the verifiable things, being foolish or stupid or walking into a brick wall, but there are. I like the old engineering concept of verify everything that's verifiable, but engineers and scientists of days gone by knew that not everything was going to be verifiable, and that's fine. There are a lot of things we can say that we're not in touch with the details. We don't really know, but at the same time, we have to move forward. We have to live our lives. We have to. The thing. Hey, if we were going to be really scientific, genuinely scientific and honest, then why is it that there's a company like Monsanto still in existence? Not that I want to get too political, but to me, I think there's far more evidence that there's something going on there that isn't right than there is that all sort of faith is wrong. And yet look at how in our culture all of this bioengineering of food and changing it this way and owning the copyright on the DNA and all stuff is it's crazy to me.
Well,
It's
sure.
radical
And
craziness.
I agree that there's all kinds of harm caused by that, but I mean that's off the subject a little bit of it. I mean, it's yes, having faith in reality to some extent, but the the questions about Monsanto and about things, as you said, with engineering, you need to verify that which is verifiable and sort of take the rest as you can. But you also
Right.
need to have the ability to determine even what is verifiable. I mean, without questioning what is this verifiable, which is a
Mm.
scientific process in and of itself. If you can't do it, then it's
Definitely. We have to know that something is genuinely testable before we can test it or claim that the results of our test actually say anything. Definitely.
right. Exactly. I mean, there's philosophies and things, and of course there's utilitarian functions. That's where I don't understand why the universe exists, but it's pretty utilitarian to assume that it happened in some way, shape, or form, regardless
It's
of my
definitely here.
understanding of that. But if I were to deny that, I think we'd have some bigger problems with with trusting my opinions on anything. But
Mhm.
um, I mean, the long and short of it though is that there are things that we cannot know, and on those things, it makes sense to make decisions when you have to.
Yeah.
When there's something that there's no way to verify it, but you need to make a decision before you can move forward. I completely understand, but whenever the decision can be in the null and it doesn't change the results of moving forward, I think that is necessarily the most honest and utilitarian method of doing so.
When you're
Um,
going to discuss what we know for certain, yes. But when you're going to discuss and declare what is, that is absolutely dishonest. You don't know what is that you don't know that is. You just don't know that. So you can say, honestly, we don't know. But you
That's
can't
true, but
say
saying that
it's
there
not.
is a God is this is what I was getting at the opening part is I used to call that we don't know God. I was in that boat,
The God
and
of the
I had
gap.
realized
I
that
don't
there's a
believe in the
whole
God of the
lot
gap,
more
but
honesty behind just saying
yeah,
I don't know.
right.
And I mean that's where that is still it's again uh,
Well,
getting back to the
let me
idea of
say,
fundamentalist atheism is I believe myself to be a fundamentalist atheist.
oh, really?
If there
Yeah.
is something supernatural or something that is not verifiable, that's that there's a question about, my assumption on it is that that's not true. And the assumption I make on that is because it's very utilitarian to assume that's not true. There could very well be dragons and fairies and unicorns out there, but it doesn't do me any good to believe in them. And it's not doesn't offer any predictive power or functional capabilities. So there's no benefit to having that
Okay.
belief other than maybe the
So
belief changes my behavior or my actions
now,
personally.
could I mention a few things that I think I've noticed in the way that I hear you talk?
Sure.
You talk about, well, this God that you called God before that ended up really being for you things that you just didn't know. And then you also ask me questions about, well, what is it I need that I don't have? It sounds to me like you're rejecting God because you can't put him into this utilitarian box. And what if God doesn't fit in a utilitarian box? What if his primary involvement with you doesn't have anything to do with this utilitarian approach to it all? What if there's parts of your life that are outside of that, and that all of these people who are trying to convince atheists they ought to believe are just blowing air out of their mouths, trying to turn it into something they want to convince you has utilitarian value when it may not even have that? So I think I hear you talking about some things about how ideas of God are not fitting into a particular schema. And I would almost have to agree with you. Well, no, I don't think they fit into that schema very well at all. And if that was the only schema for considering reality, then then you'd have to be correct in going in the direction you are. But I don't see that as the only schema.
Well, and I'd love to hear, I guess, what your ideas on the other schemas are. But before we get to that, I'm going to defend my concept of that a little bit. Is that you're absolutely right that I reject the idea of God because it's not utilitarian to make the assumption that there is one. That since it is not verifiable, and there is no way for me to know one way or the other, I'm at one of those points where I need to make a decision between. I have to say I don't know. I have to take the agnostic position. Um, but I still
But
need
you
to
do
say, well,
believe that there is no God.
right. I believe that
Well,
there
you and I are
is
so
no,
much alike, except that when we flip the quarter, I guess we went the other way.
that it's so true. And that's where I get confused for one as to how that coin flip can go so many different ways because I don't see it to be a coin flip. I think that there's about a 1 in a billion chance or smaller that there is a God, and I make my decision with a much confidence, but I still admit there's a possibility that I'm wrong. I don't I don't know things, but every experience, every measure that I've ever had of reality indicates that there is no such thing as the supernatural, and God would fall into the category of supernatural. So
Maybe.
it's maybe that's I guess it. I guess my definition of what a god is would fall into the definition of supernatural. And sure, it's possible even that the idea, the concept of God or the entity that is called God is actually just a super powerful ancient alien race that seeded human life and implanted certain parts of our. I don't know. It's there's
Well,
so many
I
different
can,
possible.
I can, I can concede with you even this, that the reason why there are so many people who do believe in God versus the few people who don't, I can see how that's totally attributed to the socialization process that we all go through. And in fact, I would see that myself as being part of the reason why I think that authentic faith, real faith, is perhaps, unfortunately, rare. And that most people um, believe what they believe simply because this is the way they've gone and the direction they've worked in. It's worked out for them. The social pressures, the anthropological dynamics of their culture. This is just where they're at, and I personally don't see that as a core value of root faith. Personally,
I agree. I think that an unquestioned faith is a faith that doesn't really. I think there's a biblical reference about one who builds their house on sand versus one who
Right.
builds their house on stone, and questioning is how you determine what you're building your house on.
I don't want an unquestioned faith, and I don't want the things that I even believe in that possess weaknesses to be held onto as if they don't have weaknesses. I don't need denial of the problematic elements of some of the things that I believe to be something I have to hide from.
That's fantastic. I wish more people had that understanding of the world. But I think there's also something to be said. I mean, beyond just the anthropological and sociological aspects of faith as part of a cultural upbringing, there's also the rather coercive elements to most religions and the psychological effect that indoctrination of young children and fear play a role into, as we've talked about, the hell doctrine,
Yeah.
And things of that nature. So there's I've seen more stories of people who have written even in their suicide notes or who have gone through serious mental issues and emotional issues through much of their life because they were struggling with the fact that they couldn't believe in God, and they were terrified that meant that they were going to someday find out that they were wrong. Which
one of the damned, I'll tell you this: I don't have much need for a God who's going to hold it against anybody who has genuine, honest, and authentic issues with what's going on here. Any God who's going to have a problem with that is unworthy of the sort of thing that most religionists try to talk about. And I have to be honest about the fact that even though I associate myself as a person of faith, that I therefore am connected in that way, at least, with a great number of extremely cruel, manipulative, fear-driven people who are
And well,
trying to just use this as a crowbar, you know.
That's exactly where I'm getting at, though. And I have to say, I just heard from our producer we've only got a couple minutes left. I guess we're cutting out a little bit early today, but that's what I'm getting at with the idea that faith is harmful, faith of any kind. Even your faith, your extremely open faith, it still lends credence. It gives legitimacy and support to those who have arguably no leg to stand on, or objectively no leg to stand on. But because they can say, well, look, even the unconventional pastor here, he's extremely open-minded and he still believes this much is true. So we're just making an extension from that and accepting a few more realities from there. Once you start to accept
guilt
things,
by association,
it is, but it's not. It doesn't make you guilty. It makes
people need to take responsibility for their own beliefs, for their own thoughts, for their own process. And I think we're going to be better off holding them accountable for what they do with these things rather than whether or not they have these things to do something with.
That's true, but when I think it's somewhere around 80% of the world population believes in the supernatural of some sort or another. And from there, it just comes down to a matter of degree. There's people who believe in a very, very open and loving God that you do, and there's people who believe that if you drive an airplane into a building, you'll be rewarded with 72 virgins in the afterlife. It's a spectrum. And that within that spectrum, though, it all the more open ends of the spectrum, the nicer end of the spectrum, is still associated with the terrible end of the spectrum, not in the way that makes you guilty, but in the way that makes them feel and seem in the public eye more justified. When those people cease to exist, when that kind of faith ceases to exist, I will no longer have a problem with faith. I will promise you, even if there are people out there that have beliefs of whatever kind, it's not going to bother me to nearly the same extent. But even here in the United States, if we go beyond the violent aspects, there's still denial of reality. There's people who refuse to believe or even allow evolution to be taught in schools.
The earth is flat, you know.
These are harmful things, and
I agree.
The fact that they believe themselves to be of the same group that you are, and they believe that you're simply not understanding it correctly.
Most of them would not consider me to be in the same group as they are. And, you know, I would also make the argument that atheists are no different. They run that entire spectrum as well. Now, there are fewer of them, and so representative, but there are some horrible, awful atheists that have existed in the world, too. I think that human beings, can be quite evil, and I think we need to hold human beings accountable for what they do. Religious human beings will be evil religiously, and irreligious human beings will be evil irreligiously.
You know, I absolutely agree, but unfortunately, it is the end of the show here. We do need to wrap it up. I wish we had just a couple more minutes to dig into this one, but
we'll take it up later.
The idea that people need to be held responsible for their own actions, I can absolutely agree with you on. But maybe in the next show, we're going to have to talk about the idea of guilt by association and the legitimacy, and take that a little bit further. So, to the viewers, thank you. Today has been a wonderful opportunity to continue talking about this, and I hope that I didn't get well, actually, that's not true. I hope that I got your hackles a little bit. And I see that I succeeded with at least one person. So, thank you for joining us, and tune in next week for Inspiring Honesty.